It starts with a phrase, not a plan. You are standing in a shoe store on a Tuesday evening, holding a pair of running shoes you did not come in to buy. And the thought arrives fully formed, the way these thoughts always arrive: I deserve this. You had a hard meeting today. The shoes are $91. You buy them. You don't think about the phrase again until 3 weeks later, when you catch yourself using it a second time. A bottle of wine on a Thursday because it's been a long week. And something about hearing it twice makes you notice it for the first time. Not the purchase, the sentence, the specific words you use to authorize yourself. You decide, almost as a joke, to track it. Not the spending. You've tried tracking spending before and it never sticks. Just the phrase. Every time you catch yourself thinking or saying I deserve this before a purchase, you write it down, the date, the amount, the reason, if there is one. You do not expect this to become anything. You expect to lose interest by February. You do not lose interest. The list starts small. January, 4 entries. The shoes, the wine, a haircut that cost $60 more than your usual place because you'd had a rough week and wanted, in your own words, to feel like a person again. A weekend hotel upgrade because the standard room felt like punishment after a difficult month. 4 entries. $340 total. You look at the number and think, that's not bad, that's manageable. You almost stop the experiment there, satisfied that the phrase, while real, wasn't doing much damage. February changes your mind. February has 11 entries. Not because anything dramatic happened. No crisis, no unusual circumstance. February was just a normal month. And it turns out a normal month contains 11 separate moments where you reached for that specific justification. A jacket you didn't need because a coworker had said something dismissive in a meeting and you wanted, that evening, to buy yourself back into feeling competent. A concert ticket because your friend group was going and sitting out, felt like admitting something you weren't ready to admit. Dinner delivery 4 separate times in 1 week because you were tired, and tired felt like it had earned you an exception. 11 entries. $612. You start to notice the shape of the phrase more clearly. It never shows up around neutral purchases. You don't say, I deserve this, about groceries or gas or rent. The phrase is reserved specifically for things that sit slightly outside your normal budget. Purchases that require justification, that need a story attached to them before you'll let yourself make them. I deserve this isn't a description, it's a permission slip, and you have apparently been writing yourself an enormous number of permission slips. By the end of March, the running total sits at $1,410 across 3 months. You do the annualized math almost without meaning to. $1,410 times 4 is $5,640. That number sits with you for a few days. It's uncomfortable, but it's not the number that eventually breaks you. That number comes later, and it comes from a different direction entirely. You start paying closer attention to what precedes the phrase, not the purchase itself, the moment right before it, the emotional weather that makes I deserve this feel true. What you find, over the following months, is a consistent pattern, and it is not the pattern you expected. You expected the phrase to show up around genuine achievement, a promotion, a finished project, a goal met. It occasionally does, but far more often, I deserve this, arrives immediately after something that hurt. A dismissive comment from your manager, a friend cancelling plans at the last minute, a difficult conversation with a family member that left you feeling smaller than you walked in, a long day that wasn't objectively terrible, but that accumulated, hour by hour, into a low-grade exhaustion you couldn't quite name. The phrase, you begin to realize, is not primarily a reward system. It is a repair system. You are not buying things because you achieved something. You are buying things because something took something from you, and the purchase is your attempt to put it back. This distinction matters more than it initially seems to. A reward system responds to input. You did something good. You get something good. The loop closes and resets. A repair system responds to depletion, and depletion doesn't close and reset the way achievement does. Depletion just accumulates, quietly, in the background of an ordinary life. And it needs to be addressed again and again because the thing that caused it, the dismissive comment, the cancelled plan, the exhausting day, keeps happening. It's not a special occasion you're funding. It's an ongoing, low-level wound you are treating with your credit card, and the treatment never actually heals anything because the treatment isn't aimed at the wound. It's aimed at the feeling of the wound, temporarily, for exactly as long as the shoes still feel new. By June, 6 months into the tracking, the pattern has become impossible to ignore. 61 entries, $3,940. You have not had a single month with fewer than 8 instances of the phrase. You start categorizing them, mostly out of morbid curiosity. Work-related depletion accounts for roughly 40%. The meetings that went badly, the recognition that didn't come, the effort that felt unseen. Social depletion. The friend who didn't reach out, the plans that fell through, the quiet comparison that happens when someone else's life looks easier than yours, accounts for another 25%. Family-related depletion. The specific exhaustion of certain conversations with certain relatives is close behind. The remainder is a catch-all category you eventually label simply Tuesday, for the purchases that don't trace back to any single identifiable event, just the generalized fatigue of being a person who works and commutes and manages a life. You notice something else in June. The purchases are getting slightly larger. Not dramatically, nothing that would show up as a crisis on a bank statement, but the average transaction has crept upward from $85 in January to $112 in June. You do not consciously decide this. It simply happens, the way tolerance happens with anything you use repeatedly to manage a feeling. The shoes worked in January. By June, shoes alone don't quite do it anymore, and you find yourself adding something to the cart that you wouldn't have added 6 months earlier. The extra accessory, the upgraded version, the thing that makes the treatment feel proportional to a depletion that, itself, has been slowly increasing all year, because nothing about the underlying cause has actually changed. You start to wonder, somewhere around this point, what would happen if you simply stopped? Not stopped buying things, stopped using the phrase as the trigger. You don't act on this yet. You keep tracking. You want to see the full year before you decide anything. The second half of the year does not improve the numbers. If anything, it clarifies them. September is the worst month of the entire experiment. 14 entries, $1,580. You go back through your calendar to understand why, and what you find is not one large event but a compounding of small ones. A project at work that quietly fell apart over 3 weeks. A friend's wedding that required travel and gifts, and the particular financial and emotional strain of watching someone else's milestone while feeling stalled in your own life, and a health scare with a family member that resolved fine, but left 3 weeks of low-grade dread in its wake. 3 separate depletions, running concurrently, and 14 separate moments of reaching for the same repair mechanism to address all 3 of them, none of which the repair mechanism was ever actually equipped to fix. By the end of the year, the full tally arrives. 122 entries, $14, $320. You stare at the number for longer than you stared at any individual receipt all year. It is not the size of the number exactly, though the size is real. $14,320 is more than a modest car, more than a year of a modest retirement contribution, more than most people's emergency fund. What stops you is the shape of it. 122 separate moments across 12 months where something hurt, however slightly. And your response, your only consistent, practiced response, was to spend money. You never once, in the entire year, wrote down, "I deserve this," and then did something free. You never wrote it down and then called a friend, or went for a walk, or simply sat with the feeling until it passed on its own. The phrase and the purchase were, in your data, completely inseparable. 122 times and 122 times, the response was identical. You do the math you've been avoiding. If you had taken that money and put it into savings instead, not invested, not compounded, just set aside, it would represent close to 4 months of your current living expenses. 4 months of runway you don't currently have. 4 months where a job loss or a health issue or any ordinary crisis would be an inconvenience instead of an emergency. Invested and compounded across the years you have left until retirement, the number becomes considerably larger, large enough that you close the calculator rather than sit with it directly. But the number that actually stays with you is not a financial one. It's this. 122 times this year, you experienced something painful enough that you needed a repair mechanism, and 122 times, you reached for the only one you had. That's not a spending problem, primarily. That's an inventory problem. You have exactly one tool, and you have been using it for everything. The way someone with only a hammer eventually starts treating every problem as a nail. The dismissive comment from your manager doesn't need a jacket. It needs to be addressed directly, or let go of consciously, or discussed with someone who can help you process it. The cancelled plans don't need dinner delivery. They need you to notice that you're lonely and do something about the loneliness itself rather than about the evening's discomfort. The exhausting Tuesday doesn't need the accessory. It needs rest, or a boundary at work, or an honest conversation about workload that you have been avoiding because it's harder than clicking add to cart. None of this is a failure of discipline. You want to be clear with yourself about that. Because the instinct, looking at $14 and $320, is to reach for shame. And shame is just another depletion event waiting to be repaired with another purchase. The pattern isn't a character flaw. It's a gap in your toolkit. And gaps in toolkits are fixable in a way that character flaws supposedly aren't. You don't stop buying things that feel good. That was never actually the goal. And you're suspicious now of any conclusion that neat. What you start doing, slowly, imperfectly, is adding a single second of friction before the purchase. Not to stop it, but to ask one honest question first. What actually happened right before I thought this? If the answer is genuine celebration, you let the purchase happen without complication. If the answer is depletion, if something hurt and you're reaching for the credit card to make the hurt smaller, you pause and ask a second question. Is there anything else, today, that would actually address this, even partially? Sometimes the answer is no, there isn't, and you buy the shoes anyway, and that's fine. The point was never austerity. The point was noticing that sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the thing you actually need is a 15-minute walk, or an honest text to a friend saying today was hard, or simply naming the specific thing that hurt instead of roting around it toward a shopping cart. Those moments don't show up in a spreadsheet. They don't reduce the annual total in any way you can graph. But over the following months, without you tracking it as carefully, the entries start to space out. Not because you're restricting yourself, because some of the depletion is actually getting addressed now, at the source, instead of being anesthetized at $91 a time. You keep the notebook. You still write down the phrase when it shows up, because the noticing is the only part of this that ever actually worked. The purchases were never really the problem. The problem was that for 122 moments in a single year, you didn't know you were hurting until you were already standing at a register, holding the evidence. Now you know a little sooner. That's not a fix. It's just the beginning of one. The first time in a long time you've had more than a single tool for a very old, very ordinary kind of pain.